Hello, this is Lewis. Apologies for the quality of this little intro. I'm sitting at the dining table, recording it directly into the laptop microphone. I'll be fast. This is a special episode of the podcast. I sat down with a friend of mine, the playwright, the dramatist, the storyteller, Jack MacGregor. I would call him a natural talent, but that is possibly a disservice to the work and the efforts that he puts into his craft. He's a very talented guy. He kindly came round to the flat back in March, a long time ago, I know, to discuss his upcoming play Prophets for the Edinburgh Fringe this year, the Edinburgh Fringe 2026. Yeah, back in March. It's been a busy year for me, a life-changing year actually, but I'll do a whole episode on that, all about me. Right, so this is a conversation with Jack MacGregor on his method, his craft, a little bit about the play, and I'll be sure to put all the links under the episode. But full disclosure, much to my embarrassment, my intention was to bring a bit of attention to his fundraising efforts for the play, and I never got round to editing this, and then the window closed. So I do need to apologise for that. But in the end, it wasn't required because people still support the arts, which was just uplifting to see. Okay, yes, right. So this is the Crack Podcast, and we are talking to Jack MacGregor. I don't know.
You'll pick some opportune moment to zoom in, and it's like, wow, look, we've been talking so naturally.
Absolutely, yeah, it just flows.
Wow, what a naturally flowing conversation to enter into the episode with.
And here we go. What I'd like to begin with, if you want to talk about, is how did you get started with your creative career?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. Well, thanks very much for having me here. How do I get started? How does anyone get started? I remember when I was a kid, I grew up here in the sort of Inverness area, and at the primary school I went to, shout out Cradle Hall, we had this thing every week called Star Writer, and I would try to be the Star Writer every week. You're nodding your head like you remember Star Writer.
I had that at my school.
You had that? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, common. Love those golden stars. I think that probably shows like an early, maybe that's like an early kind of psychological thing about like where does the creative impulse arise from in me. But it started off as a sort of external thing of I want that sticker, which was a bit, sounds a bit thin, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, I had this passion burning within me, this deep creative like spark waiting to be born. I just really wanted that sticker. And I went away and I would write big stories. Like I would have these big jotters that we would do our creative writing tasks in, and I would take them home sometimes and I would just fill them up with stories. And obviously some of them were, good enough and they won the Star Writer thing. But I mean, also sometimes I was completely phoning it in. I was copying the plot of Halo 2 into my jotter as if I'd thought of that. So, from an early age, plagiarism, definitely there.
Influences.
Influences. Homage, we can call them. But, I think it was like grasping like that this is what a story is, this is what a character is, this is what it means to take a reader on a journey. And I was really interested in that, and I realized that I spent my whole day pretty much thinking of wee stories. Oh, you're still writing your wee stories, son. I used to hear that all the time. My grandparents or my family. Oh, he loves his wee stories. And just having to sort of make that like a thing. It's also like you do your turn, right? So in sort of the family culture, it's like someone does a song or a poem or whatever, and I was encouraged to have a wee story or something. So part of it kind of comes from that childhood experience of finding the thing I was good at. And like, I think a lot of kids, they're encouraged to find the one thing that they can distinguish themselves from other kids from. And within my family, because I've got 2 other siblings, my thing was writing, was words.
Your wee story.
My wee stories, aye. So that was it. And that was the thing I did. And I obviously just didn't really take it that seriously because it wasn't any deeper than I wanted to be star writer. But I really liked English in high school. But more than that, I remember I got really involved in drama because the secondary school I went to, shout out Cologne Academy, was the only school in Highland that offered a drama department at the time.
Sure.
So I was lucky enough to be cast in looking back on it, a very ambitious staging of His Dark Materials Part 1 and 2. Like, I think it was an original adaptation or something of the books by Philip Pullman. It was very, very ambitious to do that with like school kids. This grand fantasy epic about like the magisterium killing God. Like, what is going on? And like everybody has like little demon puppets that we had the art department make, and like people controlled them.
Sure.
So I had like a minor role in that, and it was like my first time acting really in like front of like lots and lots of people. And it was great, and it was like discovering a kind of newfound confidence in myself. And I was like, right, there's something really special happening when a live audience meets a live story. Something there is happening. I didn't quite recognize what it was, but I knew there was like a high, and I wanted to know more about that. And I did, NT Connections, and I was like, I'll do 1 year of the HNC at the college in the town I live in, and I'll just see.
I was still mid-nose at that point, wasn't it?
It was, yes. Yeah. But it was just about to move to the new campus. So my year was the first year in that new campus, for the UHI Inverness campus.
I should let the listeners know that's where we met.
That's where we met. That's and in those hallowed halls where we first made contact with one another.
But the UHI, did that mold your creative writing? Like, I went there to be an actor, and I discovered I liked behind the scenes more.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I went there after doing like NT Connections and knowing that I really liked stage work, and I remember having a conversation with my family, and they were really keen that I studied law.
All right.
Most of my family hadn't had access to that, level of education before, so they were very keen that I go up and out and escape to sort of an upper middle class aspirational career in law as a solicitor.
Safe.
And I convinced them to let me do the 1 year because lawyers need to know how public speaking works, and they need to be confident.
It's a performance.
It's a performance. So I managed to convince them 1 year, and I did really well in my first year, and then I just sort of continued doing it. And then eventually they came round to the idea that maybe this might be worth something, maybe as a backup, or maybe as as something else.
Did UHI give you any opportunities?
Oh yeah, tons. Yeah. I mean, I had a really, really good time. I mean, I think it's what you make of it. It's funny. I had a great time. I realize now that I've been working for more than 4 years now, about 4.5 years since I started working professionally, people don't ask you where you went.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, actually. People don't, The thing I always say to people as well is, university is good for a lot of things, and college, in the case of, where I went, like, it's all good for, learning, like, some of the basics. But the best connections you make are actually probably within the first year or two after you leave. Because when you're with people in your course, you're just there because you're all there. Yeah. You might find fantastic and brilliant, ambitious partnerships that will endure. But actually, I think it's much more likely that you'll discover those people when you're out in the industry working and finding those people out there. And over the course of my degree, I realized that I hated acting, and I was much, much more interested in those wee stories that I started out with. So writing, sometimes directing. I've directed a lot of my work. You know, I've gained some rep as a director, but I do see myself mostly as a playwright, mostly as a writer of stories.
Was it the full 4 years you did?
I did the full 4 years, and then they invited me to be the first person to do a master's in drama. So I created that with the help of the drama department, the MRes in creative practice. And to do that, I went to Svalbard, which is just south of the North Pole, and wrote a play. And that was my research, was going up there. And I paid my own way to go up there. I worked on a Pinewood film. I worked on the James Bond No Time to Die.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was a crazy job. And then that was in the summer of 2019. And then that October, I just bought the ticket, and I went to Longyearbyen, which is the sort of capital of the territory, is Svalbard. And I just spent a bunch of time up there writing, and then those field notes became the first draft of my very first play, which was Nightlands, which was eventually produced in 2022 by Dog Star Theatre Company. We ran at the Fringe, and that was my first production.
So your first taste of success, if you like.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. What is success? What is success? And what is success at the Fringe as well? Because we only ran for 2 weeks, so we didn't have any money. You know, we did pretty well. We got good reviews. We got national coverage, which was excellent. We got an award, which was the Summer Hall Lustrum Award, which is like a sort of venue-specific award that Summer Hall give out to their curated program. So things that they feel are the best of their program that year. So that was a huge honor. I'm always grateful for them for being the first to kind of recognize some of the work. But it was also a year where I was shortlisted for the St. Andrews Playwriting Prize. So that was another big thing that happened in 2022. And there was a lot of stuff that was starting to click into place. To be honest, and this is going to sound terrible, but as someone who started working in the industry in the pandemic and immediately after the pandemic, it was a sort of leveler in terms of geography, because everything moved online, and therefore the fact I was in Inverness didn't actually disqualify me from many opportunities, because everybody was meeting online. So a lot of my work could actually happen, and people were willing to let me in past that first barrier of sending the cover letter. I wasn't immediately filtered because I wasn't in the Central Belt.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think if there's one sort of big takeaway in terms of the creative industries and the pandemic, of course we could talk about that forever, but I think one of the things that people need to remember is that there's a whole other country out there. While we can't reverse generations of economic trends, we have to be very aware that there is a whole other country with vast regional differences and identities that has to be met by the arts and by the Scottish government and by the UK government, and that provision and support needs to be there. Because I got quite lucky, but there's a lot of great people I know, we both know, who went through our course, who are who should be top flight in the industry making a living, and they don't do that. And that is actually because of a lot of structural inequalities built into that system that benefit the Central Belt and further south, obviously on a national level, benefiting London. So I've a lot of my early career was about trying to sort of square away a lot of that and prove maybe to myself and to others that I could make a start in my career in Inverness.
Yeah.
So for a few years, that was what my career did look like. And then eventually my brother moved to Edinburgh and said, "Do you want to move in with me in Edinburgh?" And I said, well, I found it, I spent about a year thinking about it. I found it to be a very painful kind of decision because I didn't really want to leave.
Sure.
But in late 2024, I did move down, and I kind of realized that I actually can't hold back the tide in a way. One person cannot reverse, as I say, generations of macroeconomic trends in Scotland.
It's just the way it is. No, I understand. Yeah, but you can bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, I do try, and a lot of my projects have sought to build on my connections to my community here. And also, I'm an associate artist with Dog Star Theatre Company, which is the only theatre company based in the north of Scotland that produces professional work.
What was the Taylor of Inverness?
Taylor of Inverness and Factor 9, Sky is Safe, lots of fantastic plays. And I won't mention my one, Nightlands. But I mean, the work that the company has done and continues to do. We had the Spark Festival a couple of years ago, which was, a real success. We platformed dozens of writers. We hope to do it again. I really think that the company is unique in its mission to build and support talent in the north of Scotland, and that's Aberdeenshire, that's the Highlands, that's Outer Hebrides, Inner Hebrides, Orkney, Shetland. That's all these areas that need the support and aren't currently getting it.
They've all got their own sort of rich history of storytelling as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's no shortage of folklore and
completely, yeah. And I'm a very keen believer in this thing that these areas that we're talking about are not just defined by like folklore in the sense of the past. Contemporary folk opposition and folk stories are in these places. Mm-hmm. This is like some of the ideas I talk about when I get into the idea of deep Scotland, is like finding alternative visions of what the country is, and that means finding like alternative stories that sort of lie dormant but still very there, and if you know where to look, you can activate them. There's no reason why we shouldn't be setting our dramas in the sports bar in Keith. There's no reason why we shouldn't be going to the Cromarty oil rigs or the Calm Bar in Thurso to find these kinds of stories, because these are all, to me, exciting alternative visions in a culture that's very Glasgow-centric, very Edinburgh-centric, and I think it's just a great opportunity to show other sides of the culture and subcultures. And I think examples, like recent examples in film, you got like On Falling, or Ben Sharrock's film Limbo, Jonathan Glazer's adaptation of Under the Skin. Yeah. It is rewarded when you go looking for those more ambitious stories, when you detach from what has come before and you go somewhere new. That is rewarding. And I think like audiences are hungry for that. And so I apply that to my own writing whenever I write about Scotland, but I'm mostly known as a sort of writer of like international work, like international political drama.
Well, I remember seeing your fourth year one-man piece on the Dyatlov Pass.
Yes, about the Dyatlov Pass. Yes, Frame 34. That's a deep cut. That's a Jack MacGregor deep cut. That's back in the deep, dark kind of college days, 2019. But yeah, that was a sort of early kind of blueprint for the kind of work I wanted to do.
I was going to say, because it was informative. And it was just you on the stage, and it wasn't boring. It wasn't a lecture. But you got the information across, I'm assuming you want to get across. So I don't know if that is carried into...
Sure. I think actually the lesson or the journey of my writing over the last few years, if we go from Frame 34 and we track it all the way to the play I've got coming up this year, Prophets, the journey has been to say more with less, always. And starting at Frame 34 and Nightlands, I think those are my densest texts because they are very exposition heavy. They are, huge on place and huge on history and events and light on people. And this can be all right, but as I've become a better dramatist, and I think I have. I can't really. I mean, I'm not comparing myself to anyone else, but I do think that feel like I've developed my work a lot in the few years I've been working. It's the journey to go from what was essentially like a documentary desk show, which is lots of front-loaded fact, to a play like recently I had Our Brother, which went on at Oran Moore in the Traverse. And that is so much more, you can take that as just a drama about an academic and a dictator. You don't even have to know anything about the actual event it's based on. But it's this thing of going back to the room. I think it's that thing of like the characters in the room, the people in the room are more important than the room they're in. And that's been the journey I've been realizing. So it's this thing of like being more direct, saying more with less, and remembering the people in the room matter more than the room. So that's been my journey, especially like Frame 34, as I say, is a blueprint, but it is, like any blueprint, something that I've sought to improve on.
And then when you write pieces like that, do you have to try and find cast that have an awareness of it? Does it help if they have an understanding of the subtext, of the history, of the truth, or do you get that across in your writing?
You have to do that in the writing as much as possible, because it's ultimately for an audience, and an audience, they will not, like, they don't have a reading list. They come in and they might know nothing about, for example, when I did Everything Under the Sun, which is set in Mali, it was about UN peacekeeping in Mali. People have no idea what that operation was about, that Britain had been there for 10 years. People didn't know anything about that. People don't know the first thing about it. Most of the coverage about the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali was in French, because it was, Francophone Africa, as they would call it, in France. And yeah, so obviously you're dealing with gaps of knowledge. And then, you take a thing like Our Brother, which is about a little-known Scottish academic and his meeting with Pol Pot. People might not even know anything about the Cambodian genocide. People might not know anything about democratic Kampuchea. They might not know anything about that period. So the text has to function as... it has to inform, it has to get the core facts across. But yeah, when I'm speaking to actors, like when I'm auditioning actors, the ones that tend to get it, the ones that tend to impress me most, are the people who do come in with an idea of like the mission of the text and the ideas behind it. I remember when I'm sure you won't mind me saying this, but when Thierry Mabonga came in with our audition for Everything Under the Sun, he'd been reading about like Tonga, and reading about different kind of like sort of peacekeeping missions, and about like conflict in the Sahel, and like illegal gold mining operations. We talked about that. We talked about like illegal cobalt mining in the Congo. And there was just like a little bit of this back and forth that was quite strong. Again, another example is, when we auditioned Nicole. I'm sure Nicole Cooper wouldn't mind me saying this, but because she's amazing. But she came in and she knew all about the journalist that the character was based on, and she just. But then also straight into the sides, straight into the work as well. So there was a little bit of intro. Didn't talk about the theory too much. Just connected to the character, and then straight into the work. So yeah, it's like if you can show that you make the effort, but ultimately when it's a different thing for an actor to research. Audiences should not be asked to
do your homework,
do their homework. Because I mean that's not very fun. That's not very engaging as a story. So yeah, I'm trying really hard to find ways to deliver that work. And then something I'm learning as well about that is, if you can't find a way to say it, then don't. Just don't. Let it not be known.
Okay.
Sometimes that's okay. If it really must be known, then people will find a way to
let it come through.
Yeah.
But with your writing process, do you sit down with the agenda of having a message, or do you just tell the story you want to tell?
No, you find the message in the dark. You find the message along the path.
It just comes through. You don't sit down with
okay. No way. Because if you start and you already know what you're saying, where's the discovery? Where's the process? I mean, every play I've written has surprised me. Everything I've written has to, in order for it to get put on. I mean, you work that out. You find that truth.
Has that ever come to you after you've completed it, like during rehearsals and things like that? So you've seen it.
Yeah, because I've thought I've been writing one thing and then it goes up and it's another. Also because culture's not static. The meaning of work transforms. When I wrote Everything Under the Sun, I was thinking a lot about like at the time recent withdrawal from Afghanistan, and I was thinking about like how Western powers promise a lot of things and then leave. And when we did it in 2023, that was happening in Mali on a smaller scale when the UN mission ended, and that the play revolves around that. The climax of the play revolves around the withdrawal of UN forces, and during it, during the run, there was the attempted coup in Russia with Wagner. Wagner are also part of the play, talking about Wagner Group, the private Russian military group, like are part of the sort of landscape of that play. And that just changes the vibes. So, and it was very interesting. It was just a very unexpected thing. Like, because culture isn't static and because like audiences are always going in with different expectations and different biases, that's you can't control it.
No.
And also, you just got to think about like, anything from Arthur Miller, anything from Shakespeare, not to say any of my work even is a shadow on that. I would be very lucky to create something even a shade of what Arthur Miller did in his life, or Tennessee Williams, or any of that. But those are great examples as well. Things don't remain fixed. Everything's up for debate. Everything's get layered on, and the meaning is always up for. It's so subjective.
Well, you segued into what I want to ask you next. What about your influences?
Sure, yeah.
Have you got one in particular? Have you got a bunch?
Yeah, it's got to be a bunch. I mean, the writer I credit the most with my development of my theatrical interest is David Gregg. David Gregg's writing was the sort of it's no surprise David was the first playwright that I read sort of their entire like back catalogue of in high school. His plays, I find them astonishing and ambitious and so global and interesting and free form. I'm really excited to be catching the remount of The Events later this month, which is one of my favorite plays. I say The Events is up there. Cosmonaut's Last Message, fantastic play.
Have you reread his works as you've aged and got different meaning from them? Different messages, different
Definitely,
perspectives?
Yeah. Absolutely. Especially as I've gotten older. I probably shouldn't do this, but I do compare myself a lot to other writers, and I always think when they were my age, they were doing this. They were writing that. And I shouldn't do that for all sorts of for a million sensible reasons.
Being human, I think.
Yeah. But it is also just as human to compare yourself and to, But one thing I do see a lot is, as with any prolific writer, you get a sense of the different things that jump out to me. Like there's a sadness and there's a beauty and there's something so special about revisiting a play like Cosmonaut, or even one of his like Kyoto or Pyrenees or Santiago, and being like, right, these are different now. These are different now. But the play's not changed, but I've changed.
I was going to say, so does it bring you back to where you were at that time? It's a time capsule for yourself.
Yeah, and I think as well, like I've just like the world is different. Also because I think like if you take like one of his first like major plays was Europe, I think people do consider that canonically the first David Gregg play, even though it was Stalinland. But Europe is written for that kind of end of history 1990s, but also like a time like reflecting like Yugoslavia and the breakup of Yugoslavia and stuff. And it's like that is a different world now. It's a different world. And in some ways, you can't that play is so different today. Europe is a really different play. All these refugees at a train station in the borderlands of Europe reads very different, like in the 2020s. What kind of world like reflects back that? I mean, I think it's just such a fascinating thing that even like contemporary writers like David Gregg, can be read now and just like in the space of 30 years and be like, right, okay, that play is fundamentally so different now. But I also think like, I'm very inspired by writers like Frances Poet and Isla Cowan and Zoe Bullock. I think they're all fantastic, and Kieran Hurley, amazing.
I don't know how often you reread your own work, but if you do, Do you see the difference that you see when you do? Yeah.
I mean, you know, I would not put on my first play again. No way. I mean, it's just so like you can't help but see all the problems, and it's this thing as well of like exposition. To be honest, I think the only play, even like Everything Under the Sun, which is a play I'm really proud of, I think, if I did anything more with that, I would really rewrite bits.
Okay.
There would be lots rewritten from that. And it's just because I can't help but see the faults. I can't help but see, I'm saying too much here. I'm telling rather than showing. And
well, that's good. That shows that you're growing as a writer. You know, it's not that you think you've written the best thing in the world.
No, I'm very critical. You know, in fact, actually, honestly, I wish I had longer rehearsal times and longer development periods. Of course, every writer wishes that, and I get jealous when I hear about, like, you know, companies in other countries like Ireland or in Sweden or whatever that have had literally years of developing a text. You know, in Scotland, we just don't have that kind of level of resource.
It's interesting because we're a storytelling people.
I know we are, but you know, it is frustrating sometimes, but unfortunately, we still got a ways to go on it. And I think it's still so challenging. Like, it's not just a level of policy; it's also there's a sort of reactive strain in the culture. Going back to this thing of the we stories, that's what a lot of people view it as. That's like what a lot of like the public writ large. It's not an electoral priority, the arts, let's put it that way. So you understand where the politicians get their marching orders from, right? They get it from the public at the ballot box, and voters are really concerned about the cost of living and, you know, lots of different issues that might not be the key concern of the artistic community. So yeah. It's also about changing the culture around what is art for, who does art serve. And that's why I'm really passionate about rural touring and about touring theatre in general. I think we're way too building focused in this country. I think we need to get back to the touring traditions that made companies like 784 like actual household names.
The Black Oil.
Yeah, yes, so they, you know, Sheevy at the Stag and the Black Oil, which I love to point out to people is, you know, now it's over 50 years since their first tour of that play in 1973. And I always think it's very funny that the first time they petitioned the Arts Council for money, they got turned down. And they had to write a letter to the panel to ask for, as basically appeal the decision. And it worked. And they arrived at a compromise figure. Because this is back when you had to have actual letters. And if you wanted to have a meeting, you had to go to a room to actually sit down in front of them. And this kind of like human interaction, I know it reveals all sorts of structural biases and potential for corruption and faults of all sorts. But something I thought was really great about that was this was a system where you could negotiate a compromise figure, which then allowed the most celebrated Scottish play, I would argue the most celebrated Scottish play of the last 50 years, to exist. And it almost never existed. Whereas today, if a funding decision is given, there's no appeal. It's done. And a lot of projects don't come back from that. A lot of projects just never happen.
Well, again, that leads me to my next. I was going to ask, what's the biggest challenges facing you as a creative?
Yeah, it's been able to go from one project to another project. It's feeling like there's a path. There's so many amazing writers I know outside the Central Belt, but writers I also know right in the middle of Edinburgh. And everyone's in the same way fighting the same battles, you know. If you're not paired up with a salaried multi-year company that's part of that portfolio, you're basically in the same boat, more or less, with every other freelancer, just going from job to job to job.
How many companies are there in Scotland? Is the Dundee Rep still going?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So there are 6 major theatres that are the big 6, as they have been called, and they are producing. There are a lot of receiving houses, Eden Court being one of them. That's has for the longest time was my local theatre. I know that's yours. And you know, like there are so all these receiving houses. They don't produce their own work. They work goes to them. But the big 6 plus National Theatre of Scotland. And then there's also the companies. There's a bunch of companies, Wonderfuls and Gridiron and Vanishing Point, and all these companies that are multi-year funded, and they get funding in 3-year blocks. But then if you're outside of that framework, which most people are, you are having to rely on the open fund for individuals or organizations. And it's really competitive. It's really hard. The applications take a long time to write. They're very, very dense. They're very heavy. It takes a toll because you're doing all that work for free. And it takes a long time to write these applications.
And then you just get a no back sometimes, and that's it. No discussion.
Yeah, that's it. Well, there won't be a discussion. You find out yes or no, and that's it. And some of them you can only submit twice before that idea is no longer eligible, or it needs some kind of radical overhaul in order to once again make itself eligible.
Are you finding where you are with your previous successes? Is that starting to snowball and compound? Is that working in your favor?
I've been really fortunate. I've only been doing this for 4 and a bit years, so I actually am extremely grateful for where I am, and I don't take any of it for granted. I think I've worked hard, but I've also I've had lucky breaks. I've been in the right place at the right time. I've said yes to the right things at the right moment, and also so there's a degree of luck, but I've worked hard on the projects I've been brought in with, and it is culminating to a point where it's created some momentum, which is nice. So I'm always surprised sometimes, actually, when people give me a chance, because obviously, I don't know about you. I think this is just the sort of Highlander bit in me, but I tend to actually be quite pessimistic in a lot of ways, and a little bit cynical. So I always go into things thinking, oh, that will never happen. But then sometimes people do give you a shot, and I'm very grateful for everyone in my life who has given me a shot. The most recent one being the Travers, taking me on with the...
And is that one of the big 6, sorry?
Travers. The Travers, yes.
Edinburgh.
Travers is Scotland's new writing theatre, and has been home to some of the most, exciting, successful, sort of breakout hits from Scottish theatre in the last, since it's been going since the 1960s. So, but it's based in its new place in Saltire Court since I think the 90s.
And you're working with them.
Yes. So I'm their writer in residence with the Institute for Advanced Study of the Humanities, which is based out of Edinburgh University. So IASH and the Travers have teamed up with this thing called the Creative Fellowship. So it's been running since 2003. The first person to get it was playwright Douglas Maxwell, who is an amazing, astonishing, immensely prolific writer who I think he wrote 4 plays in the 1 year he was there. It just shows what kind of dedication that he has to his work. I always love a shout out to Douglas Maxwell. He's a legend. And then it's gone on to work with lots of people like Rhoda Munro, who did the James plays, David Harrower, who wrote Blackbird during his time with IASH, which I think is obviously all of the plays that have been produced through IASH have been successful in their own ways, but Blackbird is probably the most famous. It's just, I think it recently did Broadway in America, and it's
that's out the Travers though.
Yeah. So that came and started life. Actually, that one started with EIF, but the Travers have picked up the other half of it, the other half of the Creative Fellowship for I think now 12 years or something like that. But yeah, so the fellowship is a huge deal for me to be the recipient in 2026. And yeah, even sort of following on from last year's one, Michael John O'Neill, who's a writer I admire so much, his play Akada, This is Paradise, he's a fantastic writer,
With your wee stories that you started with, do you notice any of them? Have they planted seeds in any of your current works? Do you ever see those?
God, well, I still wish to write something that rivals the storyline of Halo 2 one day.
You got the Flood. Yeah, that was a good one.
Brilliant, the Civil War with the elites and the brutes. It's pure poetry. I do have this thing. I remember I read this tweet once that Halo is the American Iliad, and I think,
maybe,
I think that's true. I think in terms of actual significant literary works of the 21st century, in terms of actual popular culture reach, yeah, I would say so. I prefer Halo than the Avengers or something. Anyway, right, sorry, to go back to your question there. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the thing is you realize very early on is that, ideas have a burn rate that is crazy. I've got this document in my Google Docs, which is just called Short Play Idea Document. And it is now running at over 200 pages. Ooh. And it is images and music and videos and lots of words. And almost all of them never get made.
I was going to say, is it like cutting a tree in half and you count the rings? Can you look at that and see where you were in life and what's going on?
You can absolutely. You can go back and see the earliest sort of shades of my previous plays. Because a lot of these plays start life long before the official writing process begins.
Well, speaking of your projects, the big one coming up.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about Profit?
Yeah, so Profits is my new show, which we are hoping, and I think we are going to be taking to the Edinburgh Fringe this year. We've got a team. We have a couple venues. I don't have a venue to announce. I wish I could break the exclusive news to you on the podcast right here. That would have been good, That would have been good.
I'll edit that in. No, it's all right.
We'll just edit. We'll edit in they'll be talking, and then it's like, venue, and then okay.
But if you're comfortable talking about the struggles associated with a show, how are you getting on with getting this one with the ball rolling?
I mean, it's hard anytime you do anything at the Fringe. It's always a trade-off. I mean, we've got a great team, but we've agreed to just basically we've got a whack of money from crowdfunder, which very, 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 very grateful for everyone's support, and we're matched for every donation by Creative Scotland Crowd Match, which is great and very helpful, and that's sort of forming the sort of bed of our finances, which will cover things like registration and venue and PR. Of course, you need a PR in order to make a
because
show.
The money you get for the show, this isn't you lining your pocket.
No. In fact, actually, we've worked out a system. So basically, it's a profit share. Everyone's going to get paid the same split. So also I'll be putting some of my own money towards making the thing happen. So my hope is basically if I can just break even myself on the end of it. But there's a bunch of fixed costs, including venue and PR. We want to cover the travel of all our creatives. I don't want anyone to lose money. I want people to walk away with a little bit of money, even if it's not, everything that people are worth.
Are you able to give any kind of idea of how much a venue costs for the Fringe?
Yeah, I can. I mean, our estimates of different places, I won't name specific venues, but we've had different quotes ranging from about £1,500 to £4,000. Yeah. And that's just the venue. That's just the buy-in for the venue. So, we're prepared for that. We can obviously there's some room for negotiation, but I would say to anyone who's considering doing the Fringe is really know what you want out of it. Really know why you're doing it, and don't do it
just because it's the Fringe.
Just because it's the Fringe. Don't. Because, I mean, I did the Fringe in 2023. Well, I did it in 2022 and 2023. When we did it in 23, I got a Fringe first out of it, which was great. I got a prize. I got this thing from the Scottish Arts Club, which is called the Leading Light Award, which is basically a thing for their pick for best Scottish production at the Edinburgh Fringe. Both of those were huge, significant career milestones. But you can't go into something like I didn't think that would happen. I didn't think that would even be a possibility. And you can't go into something looking for critical acclaim. You have to have I was just concerned with making another show because I had one show made and I wanted to show I could do another and I could have a second album, and follow up and ideally improve on my performance. And I think I did that. But then after 2023, people were saying, well, are you coming back next year? And I said no, because I've done it. I've completed it.
Yeah.
But actually,
yeah.
It was useful to take a little break. I mean, I'm joking about that thing about completing it because obviously, your impulse is, I'll go back because I've sorted it now. I've cracked the formula. You have not. If you think you have, you're in trouble.
I should probably say, because in case any of the listeners aren't familiar with the Fringe, it's a massive creative project in Edinburgh.
Yeah, so the Fringe is the world's largest art festival, and it happens every August in Edinburgh, and it basically takes over the city. It was based. The first festival was the Edinburgh International Festival, which still exists today, and it's sort of like a sort of very, very prosperous core. And the Fringe exists around that because it was set up sort of post-war in opposition to EIF, like it was that it was deliberately on the fringes of the international festival, and therefore had a more radical and free-form spirit. Of course, now the Fringe is far larger than the actual international festival, and so the Fringe has become shorthand for both those events put together. And a huge part of it is also comedy. The part I think about is theatre, but most people, when they hear the Fringe, think about comics and they think about stand-up.
If you look at almost any stand-up, American, British, Australian, way back, I think Monty Python, but like everything.
It all goes there, yeah. And there's like tons of like comedy specific industry awards and lots of, it's all there, and that's a huge part of the Fringe. But the other half of it, or maybe it's closer to 40% of it or whatever, is theater, which is the thing I'm concerned with, and the thing that I, because I'm actually not very funny. So I'm actually not funny, so I can't do that. But I needed a couple of years away as well, because I wanted to make work. Okay, now that I've done 2 Fringe shows, I want to make work outside of that. So I did make a couple of shows outside of a Fringe context, because realizing as well, the industry in Scotland exists year round, and I wanted my work to be seen outside of that kind of festival setting. Yeah. But now I feel like, especially last year, I was walking around the Fringe and I thought, I could do something here.
I think you're ready again.
I was getting FOMO. I was like, you know what? I should do something. Because also, as the thing, it's like I kind of know the beast a bit more. I know the costs involved. I'm seeing that with like clarity for the first sort of time, really. First 2 times I was doing it, I was still really a lot more inexperienced. I mean, I'm still inexperienced today, but I can see now at least what's coming down the road and being prepared for it. And also just growing into my own as like a person who can lead teams and be with like other creatives who are at my kind of like at my level of being, pretty early career, but looking to get into more serious stuff.
And you'll get to know your own strengths and what areas and where you need development and where you need other folk to take
totally. And also like the thing about ambition, right? So knowing the goals, knowing what you want out of it. So what I would really love out of Profits is to sort of create a very delicately balanced 2-hander. I won't say too much about the staging in case it changes, but we have a really clear idea for this staging. It's a story about a researcher who travels from Scotland to a British overseas territory in the South Pacific Ocean. And when she gets there, she finds that the island's inhabitants, all 48 of them, are under the control of a cult. And so it's about this sort of pull towards this mystery. What is the purpose of this belief system? And what does Karis's arrival signal in that internal theology of that world? So it's kind of like a cult thriller, or a psychological drama. And I've been working on it for a couple of years as well. Like that thing of taking a break. I was writing lots of stuff, including Profits. I did 15 minutes of it at Page to Stage at the Scottish Storytelling Centre on the Mile in November 2023. So already after the Fringe in 2023, I was thinking about this play, and it genuinely needed that time to gestate and to grow and to develop, and I needed time as a writer to develop some deeper interests in some work I wanted to write. But it's just been it's been a real honor to find people who, like, we've got a director and actors, and we've got this whole team around it that are really that are really passionate about it, and that's very flattering as well, that everybody feels the same kind of motivation to get this story right. And I think in terms of ambition, beyond the creative, beyond what I want in terms of the story and realizing that story, I'd be really keen for this one to, you know, not just like do well in Scotland, but I want this one to be the piece that can travel outside of Scotland and transfer to other places, nationally and internationally, hopefully. And that's what we're sort of aiming for in terms of its design. Because everything, you know, let's just put it this way, it's much easier to take your show somewhere if you can pack it into a suitcase versus if you need a truck or a lorry or whatever.
Touring entourage with you.
Of course, yeah. So, but also like not letting that degrade the ambition of the show. So finding that balance is really important. But we think we're getting close to something that is going to be really special, and obviously I look forward to getting to work on it. We had a development a couple of weeks ago where we like read the play and talked about it with the team and some other folks who were sort of invited guests, and it was just really exciting. It was really exciting. I sort of walked away from that day thinking, this is a play. Yeah, this is actually a play. This isn't going to be like some pretendy thing. This is actually going to happen.
Fantastic. Right, we'll call it there. This is Mr. Jack MacGregor with his profits coming to the Edinburgh Fringe. Thank you very much.
So much, Lewis. It's so good to be here.
Very cool. Right, I'll end up there.